Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at Invest 16, which is currently in the Gulf of Mexico, and we're going to kind of be timing out the storm, looking at wind gusts and your precipitation over the next 3 or so days. So let's get right into it here with the National Weather Service. We'll go from west to east like we normally do. We have some freeze watches in effect for some higher elevation in Washington and Idaho. Then we have some wind advisory in effect for parts of Southern California, some red flag warnings over parts of the Northern Rockies, and then we have some wind advisories over parts of eastern Kansas, and then also we have another pocket of wind advisories over parts of the coastal Mid-Atlantic and coastal Northeast. Then we have a pocket of freeze watches, and that is for parts of the Ohio Valley and then stretching into parts of the Great Lakes, and then freeze warnings in effect for parts of southern Michigan. Now, down here in the southeast or the Gulf of Mexico, basically, we have this big area where we have some tropical storm warnings in those reds offshore of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and then we have some tropical storm watches in effect for parts of the panhandle of Florida, and then we have some special weather statements in effect for Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and then into Alabama. Now, we're going to look at the National Hurricane Center right now. Here's where not tropical depression, Invest 16 is right now. Here's the satellite imagery, the infrared satellite imagery. It's basically showing you how cold the cloud tops are. The colder the cloud tops, the more intense the system is. Right now, it's slightly organized, but really it's just some scattered thunderstorms, and it's all clumped together, and it does have a pretty good chance of developing. It actually has an 80% chance of developing as of the last time I checked. And that's going to be headed straight towards parts of the Gulf states. Now we're going to look at your intensity guidance, and these are basically plotting out all the different models and showing what they think. So they're thinking that the peak intensity is going to be right in this tropical storm area. Right now it is a tropical storm, a very weak tropical storm, and it has some winds right around 35 knots, which 34 knots is tropical storm force. And most of these models have it going right about the 45 knots and then going right down and then becoming some sort of depression or post-tropical storm, one of those. Now, here's the key messages from the National Hurricane Center, and I'm going to kind of read these out. We have 4 of them right now. Number 1, there is a danger of life-threatening storm surge inundation of up to 5 feet above ground level beginning Friday along the Florida Gulf Coast from Indian Pass to Clearwater, where a storm surge warning is in effect. Residents in these areas should follow advice given by local officials. Number 2, tropical storm force winds are likely by Friday afternoon along portions of the central and eastern Gulf Coast, where tropical storm watches and warnings are in effect. Regardless of the exact track and intensity of the storm, these winds will cover a large area, especially east of the center. Number 3, isolated flash flooding is possible along the central and eastern Gulf Coast, mainly Friday and Friday night. Since soils across the southeast are dry, the risk of flash flooding will be confined to the immediate coast, where heavier rainfall is possible. Number 4, wind and coastal flooding hazards along the U.S. East Coast will be covered by non-tropical watches and warnings issued by local National Weather Service officials, and since the system is expected to lose any tropical characteristics after it moves inland along the Gulf Coast. Sorry about that. And here's the National Hurricane Center's official cone, and you see it's going to stay pretty confined. It's not that big of a cone of uncertainty. We're pretty certain it's going to impact parts of the Florida panhandle directly as most likely as a tropical storm. 1 or 2 models actually does have it not even getting to that by that point by the time it hits the panhandle, but most of the models actually do, and that's what the National Hurricane Center is showing. And it's going to get to the Florida panhandle sometime between 1 a.m. Saturday and 1 p.m. Saturday, and this would be Eastern time. And I'm pretty sure Louisiana, Arkansas, and westward is Central Time, and then once you get east of that, that would be Eastern Time. I'm pretty sure about that. Now we're gonna look at your chance of tropical storm force winds. Right now it is a tropical storm by this point, and we have about a 50% chance all the way into parts of the Panhandle of Florida, into Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and then into North Carolina as well. Here's the tracks from the GEFS ensemble models, and you see they're pretty certain until they get right out into parts of the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, where some models have it tracking inland into Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and then most of them have it kind of staying off the shore and then coming back into the Boston, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine area, basically for most of New England. Now, here's the different models, what they're showing. They're pretty much at the same track as the GEFS, but the models are more restricted. They're not really going out in here. They're not really tracking inland of the Northeast, but they're kind of staying off to sea, and then they track inland once they get about 5 days out, and then they track inland of New England. And then the GEPS tracks, they like to track a bit more inland and then move off to sea a little bit, but nothing too crazy would occur from that. Now, the European model, we're going to just first look at the sea surface temperatures, and they are fairly warm, above 80 degrees. And if you didn't know, 80 degrees is usually the sea surface temperature you need to have tropical development. So, right along this area, once you get into the kind of that darker orange, kind of red color, that's where you're seeing these 80-degree marks. Now, once you get north of the Gulf, north of this area, once you get closer to the Gulf Coast, you're going to be seeing temperatures right in the high 70s, some areas in the low 60s, mainly because it's almost November by this point, and they're kind of cooling down. The ocean's kind of cooling down, but most of these areas in the 80s. So until it hits about this area is when it's going to actually start rapidly decreasing in strength. Now, we're going to look at the European model as far as precipitation. As you see, by tonight or tomorrow morning, it's actually moving onshore of Louisiana. Your low pressure somewhere in here by this point, according to the European model. We're also going to look at the GFS model, and it starts to move onshore with some very heavy rain to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and into parts of Florida. Then once those heavy rain bands really move onshore, that would be by Saturday morning, and then it starts to de-intensify and kind of rapidly moves off and is rapidly losing strength by that point, and then it moves off into North Carolina, where still some heavy rain bands occur into Sunday night, and then it fully moves off. So we're going to look at your precipitation totals right now. These are your rainfall totals. Anywhere in those blues, that's about half an inch to 1 inch. In those yellows, 1 to 2 inches. 2 to 5 in those reds. And then in those browns, you're around 5 to 7. In the whites, 7 to 7.5. And then in those blues, 7.5 to 10. If you're in a purple, that is 10 plus inches. So you see most of these heavier bands do stay offshore. Luckily, that would definitely lead to some flooding, but actually wouldn't lead to as much flooding as it would, let's say, if the ground was saturated, as these areas did experience about a month-long drought, whereas most of these areas saw less than half an inch of rainfall. Some areas didn't even see any rainfall in the month of September, unfortunately leading to some wildfires. But recently we have been seeing an uptick in storms tracked throughout the southeast, so that has been leading to some more rainfall. So the ground is more saturated than normal, than September. And you see 3 to 5 inches over parts of the Panhandle of Florida, stretching into Alabama, Mississippi, and then into parts of coastal Louisiana. Now, as we move it a little bit north, you see right now for North Carolina and South Carolina, they're seeing about 3 to 5 inches as well. And some bands, depends where these bands set up. If these bands move a little bit to the east or to the west, definitely could impact how much those areas do see. Now, if we do now we're gonna actually look at our wind speeds from the European model, kind of like how we did it in the last video. So knots times 1.15 equals miles per hour, and then here's a little conversion chart from 10 to 70. And now we're gonna look at your wind speeds, your maximum wind speeds throughout the 84-hour time frame, which is about 3.5 days. So here's an overview of the Southeast. We're gonna go kind of state by state or region by region. So here's Texas. Corpus Christi could be seeing a max wind gust in this period of 29 miles per hour, and then for Houston, you could be seeing around 25 miles per hour. Louisiana, New Orleans could be seeing 44 miles per hour as those heavier wind gusts kind of move onshore a little bit. And then for Baton Rouge, which is a little bit inland, you see a big drop in wind speeds, 44 miles per hour right at the coast. Once you move a little bit inland, 24 miles per hour as your max wind gust. Now, we're going to look at Mississippi and Alabama. Mobile, Alabama is going to be seeing around 47 miles per hour as their max, and then especially once you get closer to the coast, where you could actually be seeing some areas right around 60 miles per hour. And then Jackson, Mississippi, a bit inland, just going to be seeing 20 miles per hour. Now, as we look at Florida, Miami, going to see around 28 miles per hour as your max wind gust. And then Pensacola really going to be hit hard, 62 miles per hour as your highest wind gust from the system. Now, as we move on to Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, seeing around 41 miles per hour. And then inland in Atlanta, around 34 miles per hour. Not all that is actually associated with this system. There will be a couple of windy storms that kind of move through that area during this time frame. And actually, the reason that this is moving off the shore as much once it kind of crosses through Florida and then moves out to the Carolinas is because you're going to be seeing this front of severe weather kind of moving through, and that's going to be pushing the system off to the east and further out into the Atlantic. Otherwise, this really would have curved faster into parts of the mid-Atlantic. So luckily, this system is kind of saving us from these tropical storm force winds. And then in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina could be seeing 43 miles per hour as their max gust, and then for Charleston, South Carolina, 48 miles per hour. Now, North Carolina, Morehead City could be seeing 66 miles per hour as their max gust, especially into those Outer Banks of North Carolina, where you could get hit pretty hard with some of these gusts, right around 40 to 60. Some areas experiencing 70 miles per hour from this system. Also, one thing I want to point out is that the video we did yesterday forecasting the system, the northeast storm system, actually the forecast panned out pretty good. Some areas in southeastern, in Cape Cod, basically, they got over 90 mile per hour wind gusts, and then over in right around Maine, in central coastal Maine, you saw right around 90 plus miles per hour as well. And then we saw some wind gusts around 60 miles per hour anywhere from coastal New Jersey and Delaware into parts of actually most of Long Island, and then down into the southern and eastern part of New England and the coast. And so my forecast actually did pan out pretty good with that. Now we're gonna look at the GFS model, see what the GFS model thinks, and here's your precipitation. Of course, those oranges and reds and purples indicating those heavier rain bands. So as we move on, you see by around Friday afternoon, you're seeing those rain bands move onshore to Louisiana. The GFS is taking a similar track to the European model, starts to move onshore to Pensacola, Florida, and the panhandle of Florida right around Saturday morning, and then it starts to quickly downward spiral for the system quickly as it kind of loses its intensity, and then it moves back onto the coast. And as that low pressure actually moves back onto waters, which are actually relatively warm for this time of year, they're still in the 70s and those 60 degrees kind of sinking a bit southward, but they're still pretty warm, and this system is actually going to intensify as it goes back over water a little bit, but luckily it should go right out before that actually does happen. And then as we keep on going, it moves past into the mid-Atlantic, but not really affecting parts of the coastal northeast or mid-Atlantic. Now, uh, half an inch to 2 inches, that's in your blues. Purples 2 to 6 inches. Reds and oranges gonna be about 6 to 12 inches. And then once you're above that, in those yellows, 12 plus inches of rainfall. So you see most of these heavier rain bands as well with the GFS staying offshore. So none of these really heavy rain bands, 12 inches plus, are gonna be onshore. But really onshore, you're going to be seeing around 2 to 5 inches. Some isolated areas could get around 6 inches. But since those grounds are so dry, they're not really gonna. It's not gonna be as impactful as, let's say, we just came off. I believe August or July. We had the southeast had a lot of rainfall, I believe. And so if this happened in July or so, that would be a much bigger deal because the grounds wouldn't be able to hold as much moisture as they could now. Now, here's what your National Weather Service is saying as far as your rainfall. And in those greens, you're looking at 1/10 of an inch to half an inch. In those blues, half an inch to 1 inch. Purples are going to be 1 to 2 inches. 2 to 4 inches in those reds, and then once you get into those purples, oranges, and browns, that's about 4 plus inches. So you see most of these areas seeing right around 2 to 4 inches of rainfall, and then once you get back into North Carolina and the Outer Banks over there, you're going to see another area of 2 plus inches of rainfall. Now, I do want to thank you guys for watching that video. Please consider subscribing and leaving a like on the video if you did enjoy. It really supports the channel. Also, turn on post notifications so that you never miss an upload of mine, and you'll always be notified when I do upload. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. It was Eli the Weather Guy, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.